Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And we will begin with the latest chapter in what is surely one of the strangest sagas in recent political history. I refer to the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, and, to begin with at least, his very odd new advert. Have you seen it? It's a video parodying middle-class voters sneering about Jeremy Corbyn. I think you can describe it. That's how the Sun describe it. It seems strange to me at the first hurdle. I don't know who it's supposed to persuade. That's the question I'm tempted to ask you, but I don't know if it's a little bit anarchy. Who is it supposed to persuade to vote for Jeremy Corbyn? Something odd is happening, I'll tell you that for nothing. You can tell it this morning when you hear the Chancellor on this radio station offering himself up for interview to talk about the losers' manifesto in the last general election. I can't. Can you remember the last time that happened? Could you imagine in 1997 if Tony Blair had spent all his time after winning the general election talking about problems with John Major's manifesto? Or could you imagine in '79 if Margaret Thatcher had dedicated the first few weeks of her first premiership to pulling apart Jim Callaghan's manifesto? It's very odd. We got it in 2010 a bit, but you could see why in 2010 it was happening, because they inherited from Labour. So they could keep saying, oh, the reason why we got no money, it's all Gordon Brown's fault. It was, you know, and I know, it was an international global economic crisis, but we're not politicians. Politicians are always going to reach for the explanation that suits their purposes best, regardless of whether it's true or not. I don't quite get this. I've got to tell you, I always look for precedent, always look for history in the hope of being able to understand the present a little bit better. And I don't quite get it. I mean, when was the election? It's not even August yet, is it? So it's not even 2 months since the election. It's about 6 weeks, is it? Since the election, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer is obsessing about John McDonnell's mathematics. I don't know if this is a professional question to ask you, but it's the one what do you think's going on? It's really strange, isn't it? So the only explanation I've got is that, well, I don't think this is controversial. The general election results shocked everybody, except those who had, to be fair, spent most of the last year telling us that Jeremy Corbyn was being hugely underestimated by the so-called establishment. Guilty, absolutely guilty. On this programme, I remember doing a phone-in. Do you remember when we started saying, I believe in fairies, I believe in fairies? And it may still be that a lot of the support for him is built more upon hope than evidence, but goodness me, of all the mistakes I've made on this programme over the years, I think sort of suggesting that Jeremy Corbyn's core support was a tiny band of fantasists and idealists has got to rank among the largest errors of judgment, and that perhaps is what we're seeing happen now, is recalibrating, treating him like a genuine electoral threat. Obviously the fear that we will go back to the country sooner rather than later, such as the slimness of Theresa May's majority and the potential chaos of the continuing Brexit shenanigans, the likelihood of going back to the country soonish is one that all politicians and political journalists are aware of. It's prevented mostly by the fact that there doesn't seem to be anybody in cabinet who really wants to have a crack at this precise moment in time. There's a lot of ambition and a lot of ego in the cabinet, but at this precise moment in time, it would be a rather, shall we say, questionable chalice. I don't know whether it would be poisoned necessarily, but it certainly wouldn't be filled to the brim with ambrosia. So that's why I think we're in this weird limbo. And that means, essentially, Jeremy Corbyn, as opposition leaders are wont to do, benefits from not having to do anything. He benefits from being able to say stuff that isn't tested. So you want to talk about manifesto pledges, you would, I think, if you were honest, probably be talking about the ban on free school lunches, the removal of free school lunches and the replacement of them with free school breakfasts, the pledge to open more grammar schools, the resumption of ivory trading, actual manifesto pledges that you can test and see whether or not the party that made them is going to deliver on them. You have to be in government. So, you know, there's 5 or 6. You've got the dementia tax, you've got the triple lock on pensions, all of these things that were in the Conservative manifesto, and which aren't now or weren't carried over into the Queen's speech. So maybe that's why. They're just saying, look at Corbyn, what a clown. Look at him, look at him, look at him. Don't look at us, look at him. That's my explanation. And I think he's done some of their work for them with this new video, which, to my mind, is... Do you want to have a listen to it? I'll do the sort of David Dimbleby voiceover. What it is, it's what appears to be a suburban back garden. In fact, just glancing at it now, it could quite easily be my back garden. In fact, I think it is my back garden. My wife wouldn't have let the Labour Party make a party political broadcast in our back garden without telling me, would she? Goes to show how identikit some of these Victorian terraces are in London. Right? By the time you got the back doors open, everybody's garden looks absolutely identical. So you've got 5 people sitting around a table at a barbecue type scenario, and they are discussing politics. Okay, and this is what happens.
I just don't get why Jeremy Corbyn is so popular.
Because he promises everything, and gullible people just fall for it.
Exactly. Young people think, oh great, I don't have to pay for university, thinking there's some kind of magic money tree to pay for it.
And they moan about how hard it is to get on the housing ladder. You just have to work hard and save up.
People think they just deserve a job without doing the necessary work to get it. Nobody ever helped me out.
They just don't get it, do they? No.
I'm quite happy to take the criticism on the chin from the fully paid up members of this wing of the Labour Party. Okay, let me make that absolutely clear, and I don't want to be unduly provocative. So rather than necessarily regaling you with what I think is going on here, which I can't really do because I don't really know, you tell me what's going on. This advert is aimed at people who... Are they being accused of hypocrisy? I think they are. And of course it's left them open to the accusation of hypocrisy. Focus on the younger person, because this is an attitude I find quite repellent. The idea that people who've been born with a degree of privilege, I certainly have, don't recognise the good fortune involved in that privilege. I've always found that really upsetting, actually, because it flies in the face of what I would consider to be the finest traditions of this country, certainly of any Christian country, in fact. The idea you recognise your good fortune, you are lucky. So if you are born into a relatively wealthy family, you're lucky. That's all that they seem to be having a crack at here. So when the bloke says nobody's ever helped me, and the little subtitle comes up and says he got his job in a media agency thanks to his father, they're not saying that there's anything wrong with getting a job in a media agency thanks to your father. I think that's... Am I overanalyzing this? I think what they're saying is, look, don't deny other people chances by claiming that you weren't given any, because you were, but your chances were given to you by your dad. That's not really a suitable rationale for saying that other people who aren't lucky to have parents like yours shouldn't be given a chance by society or by government. Is that and that to me doesn't seem to be quite the clangor that some commentators are suggesting, because Jeremy Corbyn has a son who I think works for John McDonnell, and I don't know either of the individuals involved, but I don't think anyone's going to shoot me down in flames for suggesting that if he wasn't Jeremy Corbyn's son, he might not have that job with Jeremy Corbyn's deputy. Does that seem... that's a reasonable observation, isn't it? But again, there's nothing wrong, or maybe there is something wrong, but you're never going to be able to stop people from wanting to help their own children get on in life. What I think that bit of the advert is designed to do is to say, look, if you've been helped in life by your birth, by your circumstances of birth, by your accident of birth, please don't sit there and say no one's ever helped you. Therefore, people who haven't got your lucky start in life don't deserve any help from government. That's... Well, maybe I'm being a little bit overly generous to the filmmakers, but that seems to me to be what it's about. And then the housing one, we've had that on the programme. How many times on the programme have we taken a call from someone of roughly that generation to say, well, I bought my first home in 19-something and it cost £2,000. All you have to do is ask how much they were earning at the time. And what they were earning at the time would be somewhere in the region of a third to a quarter of what the house cost. So you could buy a house that was worth 3 or 4 times, or get a mortgage worth 3 or 4 times your income. And that's why you got on the housing ladder. So to turn around to people today and tell them that they don't have a problem they have to find 10, 20 times their annual income in order to get on the property ladder. But we're telling them it's the same as in 1982 when you needed to find 3. Do you see what I mean? So who's it aimed at? That's what I want you to tell me. 0345 6060 973. It's not going to change the mind, is it, of the kind of people who call me and say these things? Kind of people who call me and say, well, I never had any help in life, and I point out that, I don't know, they got a job in their dad's firm, or possibly went to private school, or had any of the advantages that your parents' position in society, your parents' wealth can accrue. I don't think anybody's going to watch that and go, God, I'm an absolute hypocrite, vote Jeremy Corbyn. So who's it aimed at? Who's it aimed at? And I have to tell you, whether it's happened by accident or whether it has happened by design, I do not know. But I can't sit here now and say definitively that this is a bad film, because quite often things I've thought or struggled to see the wisdom of from this wing of the Labour Party have turned out in the longer run to have been strokes of genius. Whether by accident or design, I do not know. But have a look. We put the whole thing up on the old website, LBC. So head over during the travel news to lbc.co.uk. Have a look at it. Watch it properly. My Dimbleby voiceover didn't really work because I didn't have it. The film was playing at a different pace in front of me to what the sound was playing out in front of you. Best laid plans of mice and men going after Gley, as Rabbie Burns wrote. So go and have a look at it at the website. It essentially, I think, accuses these types of people of hypocrisy, the ones who dismiss Jeremy Corbyn supporters as sort of fantasists and absurd optimists. That magic money tree that we now know, of course, only drops fruit into the lap of the DUP. It doesn't drop fruit into the laps of young British people. I want you to have a look at it and just tell me what you think's going on. Who's it aimed at? I don't quite get it. And we can talk about the other thing as well. Is it just me, or is there something significant in the question of why the Chancellor has spent his morning talking about John McDonnell's manifesto? That the actual Chancellor of the Exchequer has spent the morning talking about the losers of the last election. Why do you think that is? And again, if your answer is different from mine, I'll be even more interested in it than I would be if your answer is the same as mine. It's 10:16. Phone lines are open, and you can see the film that we're discussing. I should have added, sorry, it's made by Momentum. That's why I'm so interested in it, because they took a lot of stick, including, I've got to be honest, an awful lot from me. Not that that matters particularly. I doubt they even noticed, but they took a lot of stick for being completely out of touch. And then the election results fell. That exit poll at 10 o'clock was announced, and it turned out that they had been right all along. There was a massive groundswell of support growing for Jeremy Corbyn, and my profession completely missed it. So that's why I'm so interested in it. They do seem to be ahead of the game. Speaking over the last 12 months, this pressure group that was built up around Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and which, I mean, delivered it the second time of asking as well. They just, the word is zeitgeist. They just seem to be on the zeitgeist in a way that the so-called mainstream media has missed, which is why I'm so interested in this film they've made and what it is designed to do. Okay? And what it does is portray that school of thought that talks of magic money trees and gullibility. All Jeremy Corbyn supporters believe this and believe that. It portrays them in a very negative light and highlights what the filmmakers consider to be their hypocrisy. So who is that aimed at then? What votes is it designed to secure? Or is there something subtler going on? I quite like this, because I got it so wrong for the entire run-up to the last general election that I can actually just sit here and say, I don't really know what's going on. Do you? And Momentum are the perfect example of that process, because they got it right for that whole period where everybody else was getting it wrong. There really was something remarkable underway. But they still lost. Which leads us back to the original question of why is the Chancellor of the Exchequer doing a whole round of interviews this morning talking about Labour's manifesto? What's going on? They won. Dorian is in Bristol. Dorian, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I think they're trying to come up with a very public and powerful response to a lot of the criticisms that Jeremy Corbyn's Labour manifesto got. And they're making valid points about many people, but the problem I have with this way of doing it is it kind of seems to be labelling an entire generation and group of people. I think I would have chosen to have those people say those things, and then someone that's part of that group point out point make the points to them.
So there'd be a real person,
winning them over.
a real person engaging with them, rather than that kind of slightly, I suppose it is a bit sneery, having the irrefutable point made behind their backs, as it were. So they say something that a lot of people listening to this program may chime with, they may agree with, all the stuff about magic money trees, and instead of actually arguing with them or debating with them, it sort of just zips up their mouths and then sticks an alternative viewpoint on the screen.
Yeah, and also suggests that perhaps this entire generation and income bracket are horribly hypocritical. So people that might have actually been one round will now be thinking of carrying on voting Tory for the rest of their lives because of that stupid advert that made fun of them. Do you know what I mean?
Only up to a point. I don't know that I mean, these are widespread views. There's an intergenerational conflict in place, and this clearly plays into the widely held view that young people are moaning and complaining, millennials as they're known, are complaining without just cause. I mean, this is a generation of people that has to endure. It was a recent case, wasn't there, of a so-called entrepreneur who'd inherited a bunch of money from his father and was telling them that the reason they couldn't afford to buy a house was because they spent all their money on avocado pear on toast. I mean, there are some massive, we highlight them on this programme, some massive misconceptions behind this worldview, but I don't know quite how what you're saying is anyone who holds this worldview is unlikely to be shaken from it by this rather rude advert.
Well, yeah, I think the people, I suppose it's probably because my street in my city is full of people that resemble the ones in the advert.
Yeah, same here.
Have the opposing political views. It was just full of Green and Labour posters during the election and during the previous election. Bristol's a very left-wing city, but it's also full of middle-class left-wingers. And I'm not going to be offended by the architecture. I mean, my tongue was mostly in my cheek when I said it looks just like my back garden. But that is the point. It's the people who live in homes that in 1981 would have cost £20,000 and now are worth north of £1 million. And again, it's the refusal to acknowledge that there's a huge amount of luck involved. That's, I guess, if I had to sum up my politics in a single sentence, it would be please just be honest about how lucky you are or how unlucky you are. And I think the millennials really are unlucky in the great sort of scheme of things. That's the problem, isn't it, that the people in this advert have got, is just admitting that they're lucky. And then if they can't admit that they're lucky, then they kind of can object to other people being given a break, being given a throw of the dice. Are we making progress? I think we are. Have another look at it. 0345 6060 973. Ben's in Nunhead. Ben, what's going on?
Hi, James. Hope you're well.
Hi, right. So do I, Ben. What's on your mind?
I was, well, firstly, on the question of what is the purpose of the video, it certainly is to point out hypocrisy. Because, I mean, I follow Momentum on Facebook, and when they posted the video, it came with the tagline, like, look at the hypocrisy. But,
finally, someone has said it was the tagline I saw. So, hypocrisy isn't quite the word I would use. There's something wrong with your phone line, so can you sort it out before my irritation levels go
okay.
off the scale? Why is it? What are they doing that's hypocritical there? Because hypocrisy means to preach one thing and to do the opposite, doesn't it? How does that work?
I suppose it's because, as an advert, I feel like it's not really designed to win votes. It's kind of more designed to rally people who have already voted for Labour, which I think it's not really a helpful thing to do at all. But, it's designed to kind of point out, because, after the election, there were all these accusations, the young vote has been bought by these false promises, they've been bribed. When actually, if you look at, like, how the triple lock intentions and all these sorts of things, you could make the case that the older vote was bought by the Tories in the previous elections. So, I mean, these people didn't have to pay to go to university, and it was, incredibly easier to get onto the housing ladder than it is now, and they speak as if that's not true. That's where the hypocrisy lies. Yeah, absolutely. But whether or not I think the advert is particularly useful, I'm not too sure. I don't think it's going to. You're right. I don't think it's going to win votes. Is it hypocritical? Is the point about the slightly doughy-faced
character, the younger man in it, saying that no one ever helped him get ahead, and then it's pointed out in the dubbing that he was helped by his father. That's not necessarily hypocritical. He's just denying that he had help, while claiming that he didn't have any. So that's dishonesty rather than hypocrisy, perhaps. But is it hypocritical that Jeremy Corbyn's own son works for John McDonnell? Does that, because a lot of people think that's a bit of a backfire, and at this point, I'm minded to agree with them.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's hypocritical depending upon what your politics are. So if you're willing to help your son, but you also follow a view that I want to help everyone's children, I want to provide a society which will, allow everyone to do well. And that surely isn't a hypocritical point. It becomes hypocritical when you say, look, everyone should just kind of sort themselves out. I sorted myself out.
Yes.
Because I think people tend to be like, well, no, this seems unfair to say. But
Go on.
I kind of want to say that I think people tend to look at help from society and help from family as being two completely different things. If you're being helped by family, because it's your own blood, it feels like, oh, I came up by myself because my family is an extension of myself, whereas people don't think of society in the same way. So to get help from society is to get help from strangers, and at that point... And that kind of the more toxic extremes of some right-wing ideologies resent, I mean, everything from healthcare to healthcare would be the best example, right through to education. They resent the idea that their money is being used to pay for poor people to get stuff. Exactly. And I suppose when you say that these sorts of things are, being supported by other people, but having your private school funded by your parents and, your first house maybe part paid for by your parents and all these sorts of things, that they would say, oh, no, I came up by myself, I'm a hardworking people. I didn't have to rely on other people's money. Yes. Because... Yeah, it's the worldview I find strangest. The more advantages you're given as a child, the greater the likelihood is of them impacting upon your future life. I really struggle to understand why that's even controversial. But you like me, struggle to see how this is going to win any votes. It's more about consolidating the core support. The whole line of argument I just laid out and always had this point of view. It's one I really struggle with. Yeah. Because I personally come from a family. We're not well off, but we do all right. Sure. And I was helped through university, and my parents helped me with my day-to-day stuff. And I care, and I'm very conscious of that, and I care very much about how society at large is doing. So I struggle to see why people would be like, oh, I don't want to pay to help this. I think it's exceptionalism. I think this is an answer to all mysteries of politics at the moment. There's a sense of exceptionalism, is that very ordinary people who have been very lucky want to feel that it's down to their gifts and talents rather than down to luck. And I guess the more gifts and talents you've got, the easier it is to acknowledge the luck that's played a role in your life. The less gifts and talents you've got, the harder you're going to work to convince yourself that it wasn't luck that gave you a little bit of a head start. It was something innate to you. So it's a weird dichotomy there, or almost a sort of contradiction, an intuitive contradiction in that if you've done well in life and you are talented, then you can admit the role that luck played. But if you've done well in life and deep down inside you know you're not very talented, you're just lucky, you're going to resist that conclusion like the plague. You're going to, well, no one ever gave me anything. I've worked very hard for everything I've got. Yeah, no, you were also quite lucky. You inherited a business. No, down with poor people. No, but you actually inherited a business, mate. Maybe, I don't know. Ben, thank you, helping me out. 10:32. There's another one someone's just sent me, another Momentum video, which addresses the student debt story that has been doing the rounds this week. The thing that wasn't in the manifesto about eradicating student debt, the thing that was in the manifesto about abolishing tuition fees from September, that remains, I think, Labour Party policy. So there is something a little odd going on. Not least indicated by the fact that you have a Chancellor of the Exchequer this morning doing a round of interviews designed and set up, pre-arranged, to talk about the manifesto of the party that lost. I can't remember that happening. But this video, because we've got Corbyn so wrong on this programme, and Momentum all along were getting it right. Not
sort of self-flagellating on this one. I'm not going to wear a horsehair vest about it or anything like that, because it was only about a month before the general election that Labour secured appalling results in the local elections, didn't they? I mean, it wasn't as if there was there was evidence of this growing popularity. There wasn't any evidence, so I'm not going to beat myself up unduly for not seeing something that wasn't there in terms of evidence, but they were proved right. Come election day, and the scale of the surprise of that result is probably best indicated by the fact that the winning side are still talking about the policies of the losing side. But what this film addresses is, I don't know. I still don't know. The plight of the millennial. If they can shore up that vote, then it gives them a big electoral advantage. So it's about people who don't acknowledge that they got help, either from circumstance, from family, or from society, now politically being persuaded that they should be opposed to anybody else getting help. And that's where the rhetoric of magic money trees comes from. I think it does. I don't know. Why don't I shut up and listen to you? Steve's in Barnes. Steve, what do you think?
Hello, James. You all right, mate?
I'm good, Steve. What's going on?
Basically, I was listening to you when you're kind of scratching your head about what's the purpose of it. You're looking for the spin. You're looking for the angle. I think why Jeremy Corbyn gets votes is because he doesn't look for spin. He's not looking for an angle. He's just making a point. And that's the difference. There's no spin. There is no angle.
Gosh, that's a great... How do you get people to vote for you and support you? You get them to agree with you. If you think the same thing they do, they'll vote for you because they want somebody with a similar mindset in charge. Well, okay, so
economically, there's a lot more poor people than there is rich people.
But when you watch this, if you're, forgive me for interrupting you. I just want to benefit from your. If you're watching that and you are of a similar mind to the people being lampooned in it, it's not going to shift your needle an iota.
No, but I think there's a lot more people who didn't have their dads help them buy £1 million house, and there are people who didn't have a dad help them. And it's about numbers. Voting is about numbers. But if you get the Conservatives have all the rich people vote for them, and Labour have all the poor people vote for them, there's a lot more poor people than rich people.
So what it is attacking?
That could be your angle.
Yeah, I guess so. Although, because the Labour Party leadership, it consists really of people who are closer socio-economically to the people being lampooned in the advert. So it's not necessarily... It's more about fairness than wealth. So this is an attack upon people who claim that the system is fair, and that's why... For example, younger people or unemployed people or whoever it may be this week, they don't deserve any help. And the reason they don't deserve any help is partly built upon the fact that I never got any. And this is just pointing out that we did. We got a lot of help, whether it's because you had wealthy parents or whether it's because you had free university education or whether it's because any of the things that used to be true and aren't true anymore. You cannot sit there and say, well, we never got any help.
No.
Yeah?
No. And there's not really a point in it that you can argue against.
Well, I think people probably are arguing against it.
You can argue against it, but the fact is there is the sort of old boys club. I mean, it was on here the other day where it was saying about the amount of people who work in the BBC.
Yes.
It's nearly 50%. Only 7% of the population actually went to a private school. But 49%
doesn't mention private school. The advert doesn't mention private school. I know I have.
I'm not saying that does. I'm just referring to a former topic that you raised. There is the old boys club. There is, and of course people do it. You know, I'm a carpenter. I know boys who have gone and got good jobs with their dad doing being a carpenter. I don't think there's anything that unusual about it. I just think you should need to appreciate it.
And you should acknowledge it. That's all. And if your dad got you your break, gave you a job, then you probably shouldn't turn around and say, well, nobody ever helped me, because that is hypocritical.
And maybe have a bit of sympathy for somebody who haven't got them advantages.
Yes. That's what it is, isn't it? It's trying to create the illusion that something unfair is fair, when all you have to say is, look, it's unfair, but that's life. I'm terribly sorry, but if I have a choice between giving a leg up in life to my daughter or your daughter, I'm almost certainly going to give it to my daughter. That's the way it goes. I thought when I started out in this business, I thought my dad's contacts would help me get a break in Fleet Street, and unfortunately they were all either dead or redundant by the time I came to send out my CVs, and it was flogging trousers to John Major that managed me to get my first story in the Daily Express. Probably the only route into journalism that went via entire menswear. 10:41 is the time, but my dad would have moved heaven and earth to help me, and I would move heaven and earth to help my children. What I wouldn't want to create is a child who then turns around and says, I did all this myself. A sort of Donald Trump worldview, if you will. Born on third base and think you've scored a home run. Simon is in Reeth. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
Hello, Simon.
First time caller, very nervous.
Don't be, it's only me.
Okay, well, so what it is my view on this is, if you look at Momentum and who they target, what their audience, their type of people, it's the sort of 16 to 25-year-old, sort of just coming out of university. And then if you look at what's happening at the moment with the Tories and about them just trying to discredit the manifesto, my personal view on this is, all your students have come home for the summer, they're sat there with their middle-class parents in the back gardens, watching this advert thinking, that's good of you, Mum and Dad. That's how you are. And that creates this discussion, because I think that they know there's going to be an election in October, and they think the Tories, that come the summertime, all the students have disappeared on their little gap years, will get it in October, so it means then that they're not going to vote. And I think Momentum know this, so what they're trying to do is keep this momentum going through the summer, and keep this discussion going with their parents at home, with their 23-year-old kids saying, well, I've got a job and I've come out of uni and I can't get a house and your house was cheap, and, all these sort of discussion things. So when it questions their parents, and maybe the parents have a different view, it keeps the momentum for the younger kids going.
Momentum, see what you did there?
Yeah, exactly. And then, because I think October time, there's going to be an election, and they are banking. This is why they're saying about the student fees, because that's who they're trying to hit.
But
the parents are going home, and the parents.
So it's the generational conflict within families. So that was what the first caller suggested. It might have worked better if they had somebody sitting at the table representing this position rather than it being done. But hey, I mean, this is visual semantics, really. It just feels a little bit rude, I would say, to do it in that fashion rather than as a process of debate. It's sloganeering.
Yeah, I thought, when I watched it last night, the advert, I thought, oh, that's not going to win them any votes. But then you think about how they're doing it and why are they doing it.
Yeah.
And then there's the other group of people that you mention all the time, the group of people out there that think they are them people, but they're not them people. They're really Labour supporters.
I know, well, these are the people who will be saying, Labour's attack upon the middle classes, Labour's attack upon Labour hates the middle classes, and you say, no, you're not middle class, you're going to be worse off. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and they're starting to think, well, do you know what? I didn't get help up. I didn't get so-and-so. So it's this distinction between looking at that couple in the garden having a barbecue and the Labour supporter who thinks they're a Tory supporter or wants to be a Tory supporter, and start thanking, that's not me at all.
And there's some...
so I think it's very clever.
Well, I'm getting closer to that. I mean, there's also that kind of giving people the tools they need. So it's why one of the reasons why this program has proved quite popular over the years, because you can unpick these stuff quite easily. The housing one, for example, is the best, because I've literally spoken to tens of people over the years who tell me that young people should stop moaning. It's not that difficult to get on the housing ladder, and I know this because I did so in 1954. And you just need to give people what they need to politely, I would argue, unpick or politely pick that lock. And this is very impolite. That's my main objection at the moment, is I don't think people are nasty, greedy, callous by nature. I think they're encouraged to be like that by people who benefit from it. And if you just say, look, in 1952 or in 1982, when you bought your house with a mortgage that was roughly 3 or 4 times your income, that is just a different planet from somebody who'd have to borrow 20 times their income, which they can't do in order to get on the same rung of the ladder that you started on. It's a bit rude. That's my only objection, Simon.
But my last point is, do you not think, though, the people it's being a bit rude to, they'll never change their view anyway, so they're not bothered if they offend them, because they're always going to vote Tory. You see what I mean?
Yes, the people who vote for their own sort of discrimination, vote to be worse off, but keep doing it because, I don't know, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's 10:46. I don't know. Again, I said to you yesterday, I have to triple check sometimes to see whether some things are a parody or not. James, all this is nonsense. You make your own luck. I had no leg up and no help from the state, which is great. Well done. But it doesn't mean that lots of other people who've done all right in life didn't have help from anywhere. There was one great tweet, I'm just going to find it for you, from Jack Alcock, who I think it's a good job I didn't read this out earlier. I might have sucked the marrow out of the whole hour, Jack. In short, people who benefited from free university education, a fair housing market, and opportunities to progress in their career are criticising those who want it. They just want all of those things. So you're millennial, as they have become known. Corbyn's support was by no means confined to the young. There are plenty of people much, much older who also recognise this entrenching of unfairness that is at odds with the sort of progress that we'd made during the 70s, 80s and 90s in some ways. People who benefited from free university education, a fair housing market and opportunities to progress in their career, not only criticising a younger generation that simply wants the same sort of deal or a similar sort of deal, but also claiming that they didn't have any help themselves at all, and that all these young people who don't have free university education, access to a fair housing market or opportunities for career progression, they should all shut up and stop moaning because magic money tree. And then people who did have free university education, access to a much, much fairer housing market and opportunities to progress in their career should... that's it, isn't it? That's who it's aimed at, and that's why it's intergenerational. But there are plenty of people in both generations who will be on the other side, if you see what I mean. There'll be plenty of young people who think that, you know, Jeremy Corbyn's magic money tree is the most dangerous political positioning in generations, and there'll be plenty of old people who think that the younger generation has got a terrible deal at the moment. I think I fit into that category. I wouldn't say terrible deal. I don't think that free university education for everybody is a strong policy personally, but I don't equally think that as someone who benefited from a university education, it sits terribly comfortably with me to tell other people that they can't have one. Do you see what I mean? It's better than I thought, this film, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Not that I'm clear yet on what the reasons are. Amy is in Hemel Hempstead. Amy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Amy.
I agree with you totally.
Well, hang on, I don't know what I think. How can you agree with me?
I'm talking about young people have a bad deal.
Yes, comparatively speaking, on those three things: university education, access to the housing market and career progression.
I think access to the housing market. I was born in the late 40s, and I was very fortunate to buy a house in the early 70s.
Yes.
And I actually realised how lucky I am, because obviously my age, I've paid the mortgage off and we've got quite a nice house. Well, I feel desperately sorry for the people, the youngsters who have no hope. I talk to people of my contemporaries.
Yes.
They often think that they think like the young of today, we had to save. I remember one person saying, "Oh, me and her partner, her husband, we saved for a year. We didn't go out. This was in 1970. We stayed in for a year. We didn't spend any money. We saved a deposit." I remember the house she bought in 1970 was £6,000.
Yeah, I've got one here for B. Murphy. I would like to point out, house purchase in 1950s and 60s. My generation had to save for deposit. This took my friends and relatives between 7 to 10 years. It's not as easy as you believe, but it was 3 or 4 times your national income. That would get you a house. Now, 30 or 40 times.
What I wanted to point out to her, that in 1970, if her and her, they had average jobs.
Yeah.
Because they didn't go out, they could say, that house now, I know that house, is on sale for £600,000.
Well, she's in the advert, although it's an even more extreme example. It's you know, nobody ever gave me for anything. There's no magic money tree. Bought house for 20 grand in the early 1980s. It's now worth 1.2 million. That's commonplace in the southeast.
It's completely impossible. And I think it's you also have the generation that, like my daughter, I was fortunate enough to buy a house, but when I die, they'll inherit. And there'll be quite a large number of sort of 40-year-olds whose parents are going to leave them houses. So they'll be okay as well. They'll inherit quite large amounts. And many have bought their council houses, which is a good thing, at 70% discount. So they got on the housing market there. I think probably housing and the young, I wouldn't care if this house halved in price.
Because it would help the future generation move up the ladder that you've been on. The thing is, we haven't spent any time today discussing whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is capable of delivering all of these dreams, all of these desires. We're simply discussing a film which is designed, I think we can all agree now, to highlight the fact that people who had lots of help are seeking to deny it to people who don't have any. Maybe there's an economic necessity for denying it. We're not even addressing that either. Maybe the money isn't there to pay for all of these things, but you can't claim that you didn't get any help or claim that it's perfectly natural not to get free university education if you benefited from it yourself.
Also, I have a friend who owns, someone I know, who owns 20 houses. It wasn't that difficult to get them. He was fortunate to have a house that was worth a lot. Then you got the buy-to-let mortgage, the rent paid for that, and it went on. So he'll have an income of it's about £1,000 a month each house, a bit more usually, of 20 grand a year. Which is quite. I think he's fortunate because he doesn't have to employ anyone. He doesn't manufacture anything. Manufacturing things is very important for the country. He doesn't employ anybody apart from an accountant. There are many, many like him. Some are in the hundreds, and that is such a serious problem because, as I say, it's quite a simple thing to have done. If you're fortunate to be born when you've got enough money to buy your first house, then you can get the buy-to-let mortgage. Really crucified people. The average landlord could easily own excess of 20, 30. Some own in the hundreds, and that's the reason that prices have gone up with such a...
No, I mean, again, I don't want to sort of turn into Cassandra, but we did start talking about that about 6 years ago on this programme as something that was really, really going to change the game forever. But just tell me a bit about your friends. I like the way it's good that you describe them as friends. You don't allow your political differences to drive lasting wedges between you. How can somebody who has seen their house go up in value from, let's say, to use your example, what was it, from about £6,000 to £600,000?
100 times since 1970.
How can they look themselves in the eye and not recognise they got a luckier break than somebody trying to buy a house today? I mean, it's just counting. In fact, they always, if I start to talk about it, they change the subject because they don't really want to know. I'm bothered because I think the next generation will have mental health problems. To own your own property or have security, they don't even have security now. The people I know, my daughter's friend has gone into emergency housing. Oh gosh.
That level of insecurity, loads of people are doing it. They can't, they lose their job, they can't afford the rent, and that level of insecurity to children is hugely a problem. Those 9-year-olds that might come home from school and be told, "Oh, we've got to move. My dad's lost his job, and you might have to change schools, or we can't keep the pet because we're not allowed." There will be thousands of children that happens to, and the mental problems of that level of insecurity is very, very serious. And the fact that my house is worth a lot of money is much more important to me than the future health and psychiatric health of the nation, because I think we've got a bubble that will burst. Because, as I say, it's just there are 4 things you need in life: water, air, food, and a home, a roof over your head. They're all essentials to mental and physical health.
Well, I think, I mean, you're not going to be surprised to learn that a lot of what you're saying chimes with a lot of my fears and beliefs. But in the context, as we began the conversation talking about that film, it is as simple as Amy depicts it, isn't it? You just acknowledge a little bit of luck. How many times have I said to you that if I'd moved onto the property market 10 years later, if I hadn't met my wife, thank the Lord, who I had to at least scrub up like a grown-up for a while to persuade her to marry me. That involves getting on the property ladder. I'd have been still sleeping on mates' sofas. And 10 years later, and it may never have happened. I got friends, I know people who earn a 6-figure salary who can't afford now to buy anywhere near London. I'm going to talk a bit more. Amy sort of restored some of my faith in human nature. 03456060973 is a number to call if you want to remove it again. Reminding me why young people who don't have access to free university education, a fair housing market, or sort of career opportunities and job security should shut up and do what they're told by an older generation of people like me, who enjoyed free university education, who did have access to a housing market that was accessible on relatively modest incomes, and who did at least dream of career progression and job security. And that is what this advert is about. If you follow me on Twitter, you can find a link to the advert at Mr. James OB. It's on the lbc.co.uk website. It's been made by Momentum. What do you describe Momentum as? It's part of the Labour Party. It's a Labour Party movement. A circle within a circle, or a circle without a circle, an intersecting circle. It's kind of like the Jeremy Corbyn fan club, and I don't mean that to sound in any way critical or glib. It's the heart of the Jeremy Corbyn movement, which is quite distinct from the Labour Party in a parliamentary sense. And it's a really interesting advert, much more interesting than I realised. I wasn't sure that we would talk about it this morning, and now here we are moving it into a small part of the second hour, because is it working? This idea, it's so difficult to explain this, because it's just true, isn't it? That tweet from Jack was just bang on the money. It's about people who received a free university education, who could access a housing market, and who had some form of job security or career progression. It's about them saying that it's wrong for younger people to want the same. And Jeremy Corbyn, who is promising to give younger people that, whether or not he can keep his promise is something that could only be found out after he's elected. When Jeremy Corbyn promises to give them that, people who had it all 20 or 30 years ago are shouting about gullibility and magic money trees. That to me is a statement of fact, not opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. Omar is in Birmingham. Omar, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was the anonymous texter that sent you the football analogy a few days ago that you read out about chasing a £10 bet.
Mate, I don't want to make me sound like Billy Big Bananas now, but I get about 1 million tweets and texts and emails a week. I can't remember it. Sorry, Omar.
I know, it was a highlight of my day. So
you make me feel bad. You should have just banked it. You should have just banked it, Omar. You should have banked it, mate, instead of trying to come back for interest.
Okay, so back to Corbyn. Back in 2015, my granddad, I was registered to vote at my granddad's house.
Yeah.
It was the first time that I could vote. And my granddad said, look, you've got 20-odd cousins, and they're all aspiring to go to university. You should vote for Liberal Democrat because they're going to, cancel the student fee, the tuition fee. So
I don't know if your granddad was reading the right papers. The Liberal Democrats brought it in.
Yeah, well, they did promise to reduce it, or to hold it at what it was.
All right, carry on.
Yeah. So it was a bit of a betrayal when, there was the marches and the protests. And so why I voted for Corbyn this year was because he's always remained consistent. He's always been for gay rights, unlike Theresa May. He has never stood beside a bus with a monstrous lie on it, promising 250 million.
No, but neither did he stand up and shout from the rooftops that it was a monstrous lie, Omar. Lest we veer into the realms of unjustified hagiography, I would remind you of that.
No, I absolutely agree that he absolutely should have done more during that period. But his policies are second. First of all, he's always been a man of principle. He's always done exactly what he said he was going to do. Look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's always told us from years and years ago when we were making these decisions that this was going to come back to bite us, and he was right, essentially.
So talk to me about this advert, I'd rather than about how you've been on the money since 2015 and the rest of the country's only finally waking up to what a genius you are. So tell me about this advert. Who's it aimed at?
This advert, again, I have to agree with your caller. It does seem a bit sneery, essentially, by them not having a third party there correcting people. But I believe it's people who are still reading newspapers and not getting the information off the internet, and believing essentially what the little sound bites that the Conservative Party gives out about, him having a costed manifesto, him wanting a magic money tree, yet they've got $1 billion to keep their place with the DUP. I think those people who just watch the 10 p.m. news or the 6 p.m. news, and I think it's those people that they're after, essentially. Yeah, well,
and again, I want someone to dismantle this analysis that I think is factual rather than opinion-based. The advert is about people who had help in their careers, a free university education, and access to a housing market that you could get into on a relatively modest income. It's about people like that telling the younger generation that they shouldn't ask for any of those things. And when you put it like that, it makes sense, doesn't it? In a way that it didn't at 10 o'clock. Well, it didn't to me. It probably did to Omar. So just tell me why it's not about that. I really need you to call me and tell me why it's not that. Or even if it is that, why that's a stupid game to play, because the world has changed. And yes, they could afford to do all of these things back in my day, but we're all much poorer now. And I can't put those words in your mouth. What would the answer be? I'm familiar with the kind of the lazy sloganeering, and I have to apologise almost daily for not making this programme a very welcoming place for lazy sloganeering. If you want to do a bit of lazy sloganeering, you're going to fall apart like the poor lad Lee did yesterday. But The lazy sloganeering is stuff like, oh, Labour hates aspiration, Labour hates the middle classes, Labour... Oh, could you just demonstrate that to me? Could you prove to me how wanting people to have free university education is evidence of them hating people? No, I can't. So don't come with the lazy slogans. Come with the sophisticated analysis of why that simple description of people who had free university education, people who had opportunities in their career, sometimes helped by family, sometimes helped by circumstance. I'm all of these things, by the way, and yet I just simply state I'm luckier than the millennials. I got a much better deal. I didn't realise it at the time, but we got a better deal. I don't think I'm then allowed to turn around and say, all of those things I benefited from, you can't have. The only thing I benefited from that you can't have is based upon how much money you've got. So you wouldn't, you know, my dad sent me to an expensive school, which you couldn't do if you didn't have the money. And lots of people making enormous sacrifices, but fundamentally, you couldn't do that. You cannot pay school fees if you haven't got the money, which is a great shame. But everything else, the free university education, the fairer housing market, and the career progression, those are things I benefited from in my 20s. So am I allowed to turn around and say to someone in their 20s now that you're some sort of idealistic, gullible muppet for believing that you should have what I had in my 20s? I don't know. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. Annie's in Edinburgh. Annie, what would you like to say?
I don't know if I can do any of the things that you just asked me.
What?
No, sorry. Because I think the advert is for millennials. It's for cementing the vote with us. So I'm a millennial, and I don't vote for Labour because I'm in Scotland, so it's a different entity entirely. But if I was in England, there'd be no question that I'd be voting for Labour. And I know a lot of people in Scotland held their nose and voted for Scottish Labour with the intention that it would mean Corbyn got in.
Yes.
So, but I think the reason it's smearing is because millennials are really angry.
Yes.
And we're not just angry because of the hypocrisy. We're angry because the baby boomer generation is changing the future totally from what we have planned for it. So we voted, for example, like in Scotland it's different, but we voted for Scottish independence, the older generation didn't. We voted to stay in the EU, the older generation didn't. We voted for Labour, the older generation didn't. Like, there's such a divide between the millennials and the baby boomers, and then they have the hypocrisy to be like, oh, but you guys don't understand. Well, really? You know, we're not kids anymore. We've grown up.
And that is precisely, I think, the target of this advert.
Yeah, I think it's meant
phenomenon that you just described.
Our anger.
But will it change the minds of what you describe as the baby boomers?
No, but I don't think it needs to.
It's about consolidating.
What we need is to get more of the younger generation to vote, because we weren't very politically engaged. And it's only recently that the younger generation have really started to turn out to the ballot. And they know that Corbyn's popular.
And if they go to the country again in October, there is a very real risk that a lot of people might kind of go AWOL. A lot of young people.
If you get us angry, there's more likely that we're going to go on walks and protests and marches. You know, you want to play on the fact that we are politically active now, and we feel like there's an injustice, so we're going to do something about it, and all of that's going to be free publicity.
It is designed then to enrage people like you, or to fan the flames of your righteous... Yeah, that's exactly what I mean, to fan the flames of your already righteous fury.
Yeah.
Gosh.
I think so.
And this is directed...
We're really angry.
I can tell by your words, not by your tone. Your tone, if you'll allow me to say so, Annie, is far from furious, but that's probably just as well. There's plenty of opportunities for fury to be articulated. But do you take this conversation into your own family, or do you... Because, I mean, we've spoken in very broad generalisations about the older generation. Obviously, you're not suggesting that everybody young fits into that pigeonhole and everybody old fits into that pigeonhole. Does this get reflected in your family? Because I know in a lot of families it does.
So, yes and no. My boyfriend is hilarious because he describes the baby boomer generation as having two good eggs in it, which are my parents. Because they both...
Well, there's rather more than that. You should listen to the programme. Amy was lovely.
But they understand how hard we have it and how good they had it. They were, you know, after the war, they had jobs, they had career progression, they had options. And what we don't have are options. And then on top of that, we also have to get criticised left, right and centre about how we're lazy and we're always getting drunk and...
You eat too much avocado. Don't forget...
We eat too much avocado.
Yeah, don't forget the avocado. That's crucial. Is it definitely generational rather than... So a couple of people are suggesting it's as much about education as generation.
I think the biggest revolution that's coming to Britain at the moment is going to be generational, because I think the younger generation are just so fed up. We're not going to ever get a pension, and most of us accept this.
And why can't you do... I mean, quite a few people are perhaps not intending me to ask the question in quite this way. Why can't you just blame it all on immigration like everybody else does?
Because we like immigrants. Remember, we voted to stay in the EU. Like, my boyfriend is an immigrant.
Well, then it's your fault. It's your fault you haven't got a house to live in, because all the immigrants have got the houses and you voted to bring them here, you fool.
We don't have a house either.
Yeah, but that's because all the houses are full of immigrants. Open your eyes, Annie. Can't you see? We got our country back.
Yeah, but they've got all the good jobs and they're nice people and they integrate into society and make our society better, you know. We like them.
Well, I think you need to try harder. It's a very comforting position to blame everything on immigration. Then nothing's ever your fault, which is kind of why politicians have allowed it to happen over the course of the last 15 or so years, 12 or so years, specifically back to 2005 for me. That's when the genie got out of the bottle. And yesterday, Amber Rudd announced plans to try to get it back in again. Good luck. I'm so grateful. Thank you. I'm just going to end the week on a bit of a high. Because this is just really interesting to me. Having failed really to understand and certainly to properly plot or describe the Jeremy Corbyn phenomenon, absolutely gobsmacked when that exit poll dropped at 10 o'clock, just as you were, just as Theresa May was. Paul Dacre was in the back of his car by 3 minutes after 10, I'm told. He ran out of the office at such a speed, under such a furious steam. But I'm a journalist. I'm supposed to tell you stuff that you're too busy to do for yourself. It's my job. And I failed you. I'm fascinated increasingly by this generational divide that we've completely failed to pick up on. And what's particularly interesting about it from a professional point of view for me, just indulge me for a second, go on, is that this millennial generation, it isn't getting its news from the traditional sources. Now, part of me is heartbroken at that because the traditional sources are in my blood. I'm the son of a newspaper man, son of a newspaper man. But equally, having seen these so-called viral clips over the last couple of years, where some of the little bits of the programme that have been put online have ended up, you know, hitting 3-4 million people, you realise that the media is changing. They've had a much bigger impact on this programme than any of the traditional... It's all a lovely interview last week in The Eye, wonderful profiles in the New Statesman and The Observer. I've had all of that, and it's incredibly flattering and lovely, and my mum cuts them all out and keeps them in a special scrapbook. But I don't know that it brings in listeners. I think the reason why the number of hours being listened to on this programme has gone up by 193% in the last 12 months is because of those clips. And that's why the demographics for this programme, in age groups under 45, we've overtaken Radio 4 now on this programme. And that is why, isn't it? Because the so-called millennials are gathering their news in a different and a new way. And that's part of the impasse with the older generation that Annie was describing a minute ago, who are still getting their news from the old-fashioned sources, the older sources. They're not worse, but they're different. And that's why you can still get that ship afloat, when you can sort of keep talking about magic money trees, and you can keep talking about gullibility, and you can keep talking about impossible to deliver, can't afford it. But actually what millennials hear is people who had free university education, who had access to a really remarkably fair housing market, and who had career opportunities and career options that offered security and advancement. They're hearing people who had all of those things tell them that they're gullible and pathetic and idealistic for wanting something similar for themselves. And Jeremy Corbyn, whether he turns out to be the Messiah or a very naughty boy, is the first politician they've seen. And this is the crying shame of the last 10 years of the Labour Party. Ed Miliband, I don't think, sang from a particularly different hymn sheet. He just didn't cut through. Jeremy Corbyn is the first politician these people have ever seen who actually says, do you know what? It isn't very fair that people who had all of these things, university education, fair housing market, access to careers, some sort of job security, higher wages, it's not really fair for them to turn around now and tell you that you're pathetic? You're some sort of unwashed Glastonbury Festival goer living in a dream world when you say, perhaps we could have some of the stuff that you had when you were our age. Is that it? Have we just unwrapped something there? Finally. Adrian's in Birmingham to ruin it all. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that the previous caller, Anne, was absolutely on the money.
She was.
Yeah, she really was. And also, secondly, to absolutely thank you for what you do, because it's amazing. And
I get a lot of help trying to work stuff out, that's all. But I take the compliment, and I'm very grateful to you for it.
Well, the only thing I can really add to the kind of discussion of the ad is that in this kind of age of meme-worthiness,
yes,
the tone, it may appear really kind of a little bit bitter and a little bit condescending, but there are millions of people my age watching that ad and kind of nodding along. That ad encapsulated the tone exactly of kind of being in a position where you're passively forced to listen to a lot of the justification for why you're pouring the champagne that somebody else is drinking.
Yes.
And it's difficult. It's a very, very difficult thing. There's nothing nice about the kind of the idea that you've got to point out hypocrisy on that level, but
I don't even like the word hypocrisy, Adrian. I've got to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of my mum's friends would fall into this category, and they're nice people. They just never really lift their head out of the Daily Mail.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. For me, it was kind of... Do you remember the riots in 2011?
Yes, of course.
There was the kind of mass mood of people to just destroy things and stuff,
yes,
and make things worse for themselves,
yes,
in the long run.
Yes.
But there was this sentiment that kind of passed through virally that this is a thing that we don't like, so we're going to break it. And in a strange way, amongst the boomers, amongst that kind of generation, that feeling of, you know, the young, they don't know they were born. It's almost as viral. It's this thing of, well, you're not a bad person, but the understanding that that particular sentiment is literally the most unhelpful thing right now is, it's kind of lost on a lot of people. And I've met a lot of people that I kind of like and I respect.
And they'd subscribe to these schools of thought about gullibility and magic money trees and how dare you ask for stuff that we had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of had a conversation, a fantastic conversation with a 50-plus gentleman in a pub. There was some theatre work going on that was part of in a pub, and I just kind of stopped on my break and had a chat to him, and he was very much in the kind of mindset that, you know, not so much, you know, we don't know that we were born, but things were worse. Things were much worse than they're making out. There's never this halcyon days, and all of the kind of the grievances that our generation had, they've kind of always been there, and that the politics has just changed and things are just different now. And I kind of quite tried to quite politely say to him that, like, the situation that you're in, the position you're in, yeah, it's going to be down to your hard work, it's going to be down to the things that you've managed to achieve through that period of life, but you've had 50 years to do that and a better grounding, and I've had half that. And there were low-hanging fruits around when he was young, and there aren't any low-hanging fruits around now. You know, you could believe it or not, you could buy a flat in some smartish, certainly in cool parts of every city. When I was in my mid-20s, you could buy that on an income that would be not a million miles away from the national average. Yeah, and even like the kind of the strange way that the system works now, that a lot of people who are kind of outside of it or have just kind of been along with it for the longest period of time don't really realise, like how mortgages being based on a percentage of your income. Yeah, or a multiple. Or multiples of your income. Yeah. Completely defeating the point that the houses are 2 or 3, 10, 11, times the kind of the price that you're actually allowed to be able to take out. Absolutely, and the way that they managed to camouflage that for my generation was by offering us all this credit really cheaply when we couldn't really necessarily afford it, and that of course, when they started calling in some of those loans, that's when the international global crisis happened, and that's also a reason why we didn't ask for pay rises, because we could borrow all this money. We thought we must be well off. But before you go, I'm going to run out of time. It's a great debut. Why has this been allowed to grow up? Because it should in every house, in every family.
there should be one generation explaining their reality to the other generation, and whoever turns out to be right. Obviously, I think that the more powerful arguments are on the side of the younger people in these contexts. But how can the impasse have become so big when people presumably are in the same family?
I personally think it's information streams.
Go on.
There's almost like a different set of two sets of realities being kind of perceived. I mean, even my family is a slightly different kettle of fish. You know, growing up, young, black and disabled in Birmingham is not the easiest thing. My parents, well, particularly my mum, straight off the bat was like, not going to be easy for you.
No, sure.
There's not going to be a way where this is going to come out milk and honey without you working for it. But even then, the nature of how she sees the world and the nature of how a lot of my older relatives see the world is very much based in a kind of implicit trust in how, I'm not going to so much say the media, you know, with the capital M, but that particular information streams have levels of authority, whereas our generation, that doesn't exist. That's not really a thing. If anything, it can be even more problematic.
Because you don't have objective truth, let alone subjective truth. I mean, you can pick a subjective truth. And what amazes me about your generation, and it's different from other European countries, well, not that different actually, not as different as it looked like it might be last year. You completely reject the idea that you can blame everything on immigration, which the older generation has done on an industrial scale.
Oh, absolutely and totally. Like, I think one of the biggest travesties of kind of our generation that will genuinely go down in history is the fact that we've been denied the ability to travel and communicate and cohabitate with 27 other countries worth of people. I think that it might be betraying my politicisms here, but
politicisms. Well, I don't know what you're getting so upset about, frankly, Adrian, because it's not as if the GDP. This morning, the announcements today confirm that France, Spain, Austria and Sweden are growing between 2 and 4 times faster than the UK so far in 2017, is it? It's not like that's just dropped in the last hour.
Yeah, not at all.
Not at all. Adrian, mind how you go. Thank you. A few people, actually, very briefly, I'm late for the news, so answer this in a sentence. Incorrigible FCA wants to know why you're not livid. He says, I'm surprised that people like this current excellent caller are not more angry. He should be absolutely livid. It's a pointless emotion.
Yeah.
Is it? Is that the answer? I don't know.
Too busy to be angry.
Too busy to be angry. 11:31. That could be a T-shirt slogan. Much to my own surprise, we're continuing with this conversation, and thank you to everybody who's been in touch to compliment the quality of our callers. I think there is something slightly absurd about the story that was abroad a couple of years ago, that young people weren't politically engaged. They weren't engaged with traditional politics. And love him or loathe him, and I am pretty much bang in between those two positions, which is rare for me. Absolutely on the fence. But love him or loathe him, Jeremy Corbyn seems to have offered a lot of voters of all ages an untraditional alternative. And what the advert we've discussed today, there's another one actually. We should play that one out. Can you dig out the other Momentum video that's got the that looks at the student debt issue? Because some of us have been a little bit confused by the scale of the coverage given to a comment that Jeremy Corbyn made in an interview with New Musical Express, and which I think has probably, if you were to count up the column inches since certainly in the last 2 weeks, it's received a hell of a lot more coverage than the things that were actually in either manifesto. So this comment that he made about looking into student debt levels in the New Musical Express, and then there's a couple of videos have emerged of a Labour MP, one saying that yes, we would get rid of it, and then another saying on Twitter that they could get rid of it, and that's being held up as evidence that it was some sort of cast iron pledge as well. That story has been puzzling me, and yet you know that it's directed from Downing Street. It must be that this might be a chink in the armour of Jeremy Corbyn's popularity among young people. If we can start persuading them that they've been gulled, that they've been conned, then we might start making some movement. I'm told that if you break down the data, as they certainly would have done in Downing Street, people that are absolutely unshakable in their support of the government are more likely to be the older voter with their mortgage paid off. And I guess that they bank that. And what perhaps this Momentum video does is recognise that they're not going to touch those people, the Labour Party, the Corbyn movement. We're never going to persuade them, but we need to give people who might be persuaded to join us the tools they need to close down these arguments, which I think boil down to you can't have all the stuff that we had when we were younger. And you can see why the millennials, as they're called, are cross about that. But you can also see why, as Adrian just said, the reason why he's not more livid, the reason why he's not more angry, is because he's too busy. 11:37 is the time. Well, I'd love to hear a family story, actually. And also, we need somebody to pick up on the fact that it essentially criticises getting help up from your family, and it's to promote a leader whose son has got a job with his deputy. So that's pretty hypocritical, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. Malcolm's in Bodmin. Malcolm, what have you got?
Hi, James. I can give you all three, mate.
Go on.
I'm from West Wales. My mother and father bought their local authority house, a council house.
What's going on in the background?
Cars are passing me. Sorry, James. I'm parked up.
That was a cow?
Yep. Car, sorry.
A car. All right, I thought it might be the Beast of Bodmin. Carry on, Malcolm.
Anyway, James, in 1973, my parents bought their local authority house for £2,500.
Yeah.
My mum still lives in the house.
How much was the income? What would the household income have been at the time, roughly?
Oh God, my father would have been on £30-odd a week, James.
So about 1,500 quid a year then.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I mean, he buys a house for less than double of his annual income. That means now that young people will be able to buy nice houses for sort of in the region of £45,000 to £50,000.
Absolutely, James, yeah. But moving on, James, to... well, let me just say this, James, right? My daughter is 27. She went to Cardiff University.
Yes.
She got her degree. She's living at home now. And she's done part-time jobs. But already she reads the media. She's got a house buyer's ISA.
Yes.
And in 2 or 3 years, James, working on part-time work, she's got £2,000 in her ISA, yeah? Which is brilliant.
Yes.
But in reality, it's nothing.
It's heartbreaking. So she's properly trying and saving, and after 2 years she's got £2,000, which is not even the drop in the proverbial ocean.
Absolutely, James. But moving on, right?
Yeah.
I was... Last Christmas, I think it was, I spoke to you on the radio.
I think I remember, yes.
My view was that the Labour Party is absolutely screwed because Corbyn is in charge, Momentum is absolutely wrecking it, but then the election happened. And for me now at the moment, James, the whole world is changing so much. Overnight, America, they have voted down the Republicans' health bill. That is so huge. And in Britain, what's happening here is that the government is making the case, literally, they're making the case for the Labour Party and Labour Party policies. And the Tory Party, they don't even see it. They are so making the case for Labour Party policies, in my view. Momentum, when we spoke before Christmas, I thought Momentum were the worst thing on earth. But now I'm thinking Momentum is the best thing on earth because they're going to bring politics around to normal young people, hopefully.
But mate, Malcolm, hang on. Let's say you're right, and certainly in terms of describing the mindset of these people, they seem to have been way ahead of the curve. But I haven't seen anything that explains how they're going to, forgive me, but I haven't seen anything that explains how they're going to pay for it. I completely understand the frustration of being told to stop asking for things that the people telling you to stop asking had themselves and have themselves. That does seem hypocritical. It feels unfair. But you know, the amount of people that go to university now is way higher than it was when I went. Tony Blair's 50% target has changed everything. Where is all the money going to come from?
James, we did it then. We could in the future do it if we get the things we think are important right.
Yeah.
You're right. You couldn't pay for whatever number of hundreds of thousands to go to university overnight. You can't scrap students' debt. But a change has to be made soon because the way we're going, nobody is getting anywhere. The country is getting deeper and deeper into debt. We're leaving Europe. The future does not look brilliant. And I can only speak for my daughter.
No, of course.
Her future doesn't look absolutely brilliant. My future, James, is what it is. I'm 57 years of age. I'm an old school sort of politician.
My God, the phone line's driving me potty, Malcolm. You've done great. Lovely contribution, I promise you. But there's something's happened in the background. I think there's aliens trying to abduct you in the back seat. Jack's in Emsworth. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just want to say, firstly, I mean, the people in that video, they do exist. I've got a close relative of mine who he lives in a middle-class village on the south coast, worked for his local council for however many years, retired in his mid-50s on a final salary pension, bought his first house for peanuts, lived in France for 7 years, but then he's got the gall to go and vote for Brexit, and then go and read the Daily Mail every day and sit here and complain. So it is funny, but then equally, it's a bit hypocritical, I think, of Momentum.
Yes.
To say that the answer, you know, the lady in there, she says about if you work hard, and then the Labour Party is suggesting going, you know, free uni. I'm not saying that free uni or university isn't difficult, but actually, if you look at the gaps in the market for work at the moment, they're in the construction industry, they're in building, they're in supermarkets, you know, whereas you go out and look and someone's trying to get a grad job, goodness me, it's hard work.
Yes, yeah. So in terms of actual self-interest, you'd be better off doing an apprenticeship or trying to get into a trade than you would going off to study history of art at St Andrews University.
Well, exactly right. And then 18,
you're reading quite a lot into the advert, aren't you? I mean, it's not necessarily exclusive to say that we want free university tuition fees and we want a nationwide programme of proper trade and skill-based apprenticeships.
I mean, I think the difficult thing with it is that you've got to find a middle line, haven't you? And I've rang before and said to you that I'm kind of in the middle of the two. I like Corbyn. I think actually he's a chap who's got a lot of integrity. But equally, I don't agree that, you know, everybody should be having free uni, because there are other options out there. There are bigger things to deal with.
Yeah, I guess it's just because that has become a big political potato since the election. Labour's policies on student tuition fees and these very, very, very vigorous attempts to turn that interview he gave to the NME into something that's more important than something in a manifesto. They're probably trying to address that. And the people who are, in a sense, trying to inflate that New Musical Express interview into something bigger than the actual manifesto probably did all benefit from free university tuition. So it works on that level, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think, you know, if, for example, Labour had turned around and instead of saying, right, free universities for everyone, they'd said, actually, we'll make some money available by taxing the rich or whatever process it was that they want to do, for people to retrain. You know, how many people out there are just miserable in their work because
to my embarrassment, I think that I haven't read the manifesto, but a couple of people have told me there were things in it that addressed what you describe, and the phrase, I can't remember what the phrase is, but constant employment or something like that. The policy would free up educational resources for people who wanted to change horse midstream, so to speak. But I don't know. We both need to check that.
Yeah, so but if there was a focus on that, which of course none of the press will pick up on because it's far more interesting to say that he promised he's going to wipe off all...
Ed Miliband in 2010 had a pledge to divert funds into areas that had the highest levels of immigration, but it never got a whisper in the press, never got a whisper in the media coverage. It's a good example of ghost train versus speak your way machine. Jack, thank you. The problem is, though, and I'll take this up till 12 if anyone can address this, I think we've unravelled it today, and it doesn't necessarily make for good viewing, because, yes, we've identified precisely who and why this advert is aimed at. But what the Conservatives are obviously getting very worried about, understandably, is the fact that there is no costing, there is no accounting. It's in the realms of ideology. And in opposition, you can do that, which is, I think, why Philip Hammond has spent his morning going around trying to make everybody talk about the manifesto of the party that lost the general election. Because in opposition, you can make wild promises, which in government you can't. And if Corbyn is making wild promises, you can completely understand why, with a really slim majority and fears of a general election sooner rather than later, their efforts are now being put in hugely to trying to discredit the mathematics, to try to discredit the promises. And that explains why, for the first time in living memory, within 6 weeks of a general election, you have the second most senior member of a government touring the broadcast studios to talk about the manifesto of the fella that lost. I think. You've got 15 minutes to take the smug look off my face. It's 11:47. Never. And it's just the trampoline, if you will, the springboard into one of the most enjoyable political conversations I can remember us having together today. The momentum, the sort of Corbyn wing of the Labour Party, the movement which has grown up very much around him, released a film in which some they're deliberately portrayed as being sort of, well, I suppose if we were indulging in lazy sloganeering, you'd say metropolitan elite, even though that's supposed to describe people on the other side of the political argument. So a bunch of middle-class people, mostly middle-aged and older, taking the mickey out of people that like Jeremy Corbyn, and using a lot of the lines that we've heard ourselves frequently about gullibility and magic money trees and all that sort of thing. And yet it's allowed us to have a conversation about this intergenerational conflict that is probably going to be at the heart of the next 10 to 20 years of British politics, if not more. And the distillation of it, for me at least, and I'm just one pair of eyes, is the one provided by Jack and then expanded upon by some of the best callers I can remember having in an age, just because it's alphabetical order, so I'm not leaving anyone out. Adrian and Annie, for me, at the very front of the queue, one from Birmingham, one up in Edinburgh, but very much, and from very different backgrounds, I presume, and describing very similar sensations, very similar feelings, which is, we don't care yet about what the sums look like, but we don't like being told to stop asking for stuff by people who had it. And specifically, access to the housing market, job opportunities, career progression opportunities that might perhaps lead to job security of some sort, and free university education. That's why that's become such a hot potato. I don't think it's necessarily a good idea. Read Martin Lewis, patron saint of common sense when it comes to financial matters. Read Martin Lewis on student loans, and I well, for me at least, he makes an awful lot of sense about why the word loan is the problem, not the actual terms and conditions necessarily. But that's a conversation for a different day. It's about the mindset of people saying, well, I never got any help. No one ever helped me. I bought my first house in 1982. I don't know what all these young people are complaining about. And all this video has done is highlight precisely what they are complaining about. And look, I know we've been doing broad generalisations about age, but I'll read this out just to balance things out. You're making a big mistake by assuming that Momentum consists of 18 to 35-year-olds. I'm in my 60s and proud to be a member to help the younger generation all that I can. And there, ladies and gentlemen, in a single text, is the reason why they had to invent the phrase virtue signalling. Because there you've got somebody who is simply saying, yeah, I'm lucky, my generation did all right, I'm very worried about the people coming up behind me, and I'd like to do whatever I can to help them. You have to shut that down. You have to shut that down, because if that takes root, then dinner parties like the one lampooned in this video will end in carnage over the barbecue. You have to shoot that down, and the best way to shoot it down is to say you don't really mean that, you don't care about young people, you're just virtue signalling. That's why that phrase has gathered such enormous momentum over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, because standing up and saying, I want something to be better, I'm worried about people other than myself, the minute you do that, you really stick a spanner in the spokes of some of this ideology that we're seeing emerge on both sides of the Atlantic. 11:54 is the time. James is in St John's Wood. James, what's going on?
Hi, James. Yeah, I mean...
I'm going to be... the phone line, I'm getting a little bit... It's not just me, is it? If these phone lines have been a bit dodged the last couple of days, we'll try and clarify, James. I should do less talking and come to the phones quicker. Eleanor is in Kentish Town. Eleanor, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Okay, I'm in my 50s.
Yes.
And I'm really furious for the younger generation. I've got 2 sons.
Furious with them or furious for them?
For them.
Oh, okay. I need someone furious with them, really, Eleanor. Can you not...
With them. We're all angry. We're fed up. We've all been... But, I think what we need is fairness. So, it surprises me that at a dinner party, a young person who's got a sharp mind, who's got their, their relatives, friends there, wouldn't just say, well, I tell you what, you had a free education. Yeah. I'm paying £9 grand a year. Let's make it fair. Let's go half. You give me £4.5 grand towards mine because you had it free. Let's see how they change their tune then. What would they say?
I don't know, but I don't understand. What did Adrian say in Birmingham? He said information streams. I said, how have these issues not been resolved at a family level? How can a parent not look at their children's situation, compare it to their own if they've stayed on a similar socio-economic rung, compare it to what they were, the situation they were in when they were in their 20s, looked at university, looked at housing, looked at jobs, and thought, God, you poor soul.
I'm going to pull you up on something you said to me once, James.
Oh, here we go.
No, we're talking about housing. And I said to you, it is shocking. If you had a bucket of water and it had a hole in the bottom, you kept filling up with water, but the water's coming up the other end, you'd plug the hole, wouldn't you?
Yes.
That would be the sensible thing to do. Yes. So I said to you, we should stop the right to buy. We should have stopped it years ago. And you said, well, I don't mind the right to buy as long as they build more homes with the money. And you didn't let me come back to you, and I would have come back and said to you...
What is this? This is esprit d'escalier on an industrial scale. How long ago was this, Eleanor?
This was about 3 months ago.
Oh, all right.
Okay, and I didn't have the chance to come back to you and say, if you've got 100 homes in Islington and they bought under the right to buy, and you find another bit of land and you build another 100, eventually you're going to run out of land to build homes in Islington, and the upshot will be there's no social housing left in Islington. That is what's happening. Why have we not stopped the right to buy? Why aren't young people more angry about it? Why, if you've got the opportunity of having social housing and a decent controlled rent, should you then have the further advantage of buying that? And another thing I want to pull you up on, sorry, I just want to get all this out.
That's all right.
When the lady from Scotland called, the young lady, you know, it would have been interesting for you to ask how she felt at the advantage they have over English students who they get a free education.
Yeah. Well, why?
None of it's fair.
Everyone's a critic. Flipping heck, Eleanor. I'm doing my best. I do 15 hours a week, week in, week out. And I have been wrong this week on at least 2 occasions, and I admitted it. I do not expect to get my report card 3 months later from a vexed grudge holder like you, Eleanor.
But I think the ultimate thing is you have to take education, the NHS and housing out of politics. It shouldn't be within. It's not a political issue. It's a basic human right, these things are, and so they shouldn't be political.
Here's a good one from Sarah. I don't know that. I tell you what, I'll just agree with everything you said, and then you can't ring me back in 3 months' time and hit me over the head with it, all right? But Sarah says, the kind of parents who think like this always think they know better. I'm 40 years old, but I'll always be a naive teenager to my dad.
I don't know. Well, that's her dad and her.
No, I know, but I'm describing the opposite of a parenting attitude to yours. No, that's not for you to worry about. I'm the grown-up. It's like mansplaining plus generational divide, and it's not pretty. Eleanor, that was lovely. I'm very, very glad that you have corrected or redressed the balance that you felt was skewed against you 3 months ago. That's it, I think. Can I squeeze in Caroline in Edinburgh? I love Scottish callers. Please, Caroline, what would you like to say briefly if you can?
Hello, I'm not Scottish though.
No, but you're in Scotland.
I am in...
Yeah, that's what I meant.
And I have two 20-year-old, 24 and 26-year-old kids. One in Scotland, one in London. Yeah. And the difference for them is enormous. I mean, both of them voted for Corbyn. Both of them are very pro-EU and not just ideologically. My son has a German girlfriend.
The liar Farage has a German wife. It doesn't necessarily prove itself, or an estranged wife at least, to be an EU credential. But we're going to run out of time. Give me a point in a sentence, quick.
My point is that my daughter in Glasgow, if she wanted to buy a flat, could do. My son, not a hope.
Oh, gosh, I didn't know that. We need to start looking into that. What a brilliantly concise contribution.